eyes like Mando Killion. Sometimes, when he threw back his head and laughed at the sky, they seemed blue like his Irish father's. When he was angry or tense with concentration, however, those same eyes would grow winter cold until they were gray, the color of a marble tombstone. Ruben's voice became desperate. "I can feel him waiting just ahead. Please, get out of my line of fire." The riata in Mando's hand settled against his thigh, for he could not ignore the old vaquero's warning any longer. Uncle Ruben deserved his respect, but it hurt one's pride to allow this Cimarron to escape. Tonight, it would move its stolen cows deeper into the thickets, and they would never find them again. Mando began to rein his horse around. Ruben was already— "Look out!" Ruben cried. The warning brought his head about, and Mando saw the huge bull explode into view. Its horns were magnificent. They spread 8 feet and had long, wicked tips now lowered as the massive animal charged with demented fury. "Out of the way!" Mando reacted instinctively. The riata in his hand whirled overhead, and then his wrist flicked out like a whip, and the loop grew as it rushed at the bull, then tightened around its horns. Mando jerked out the slack, even as his cow-horse planted its front hooves and spun to get away. It did not have to be instructed as to the urgency of the moment. In fact, only a great trust in its rider, coupled with superior training, had enabled it to wait until this moment to wheel and run. Once, long ago, it had felt the spear-like horns cut across its haunches, ripping flesh and muscle, and it remembered now as his iron-shod hooves twisted and cupped desperately into the soft red earth. The horse was an athlete, the finest of those bred and raised by Big Jim Killion, precisely for a moment such as this. But no one could prevent the earth from being soft, a little wet with the melted snow from a week earlier. Mando felt the animal's legs slip out from under its body. He heard its terrified whinny as it began to fall, eyes round and rolling with fear, as the huge bull's neck muscles corded for the thrust, its powerful haunches driving piston-like. Mando wore a gun, and he was good with it, but there was no chance as the horse slammed down, pinning him solidly. He looked up wildly at the bull, and then felt the terrible impact as one horn buried itself in the horse's belly. The Cimarron grunted with bloodlust and shook loose of the dying horse. Mando stared into its black, pitiless eyes and then watched as the bull gathered itself to lunge forward again. Ruben's rifle thundered. Blood rained everywhere, yet the Cimarron did not go down, and its wicked horns speared both horse and rider. Mando screamed in agony. He grabbed the horn embedded in his side and clung to it, tasting the sweet, grassy breath of the Cimarron. His lips pulled back, and he spat into the bull's eyes as it shook him like a terrier would a rat. Then his body spasmed, and Mando felt as if the sun had died in the heavens and, in absolute blackness, the world had gone cold. Big Jim Killion had been one of Stephen Austin's colonists back in the early 1820s, but he had quickly grown impatient with all the politicking and the seemingly endless wrangling and concessions made by Austin to keep the bureaucrats down in Mexico City satisfied. Damn it, he had argued, the Mexican government had never been strong enough to protect Texas from the Kiowa or Comanche, the Mexican bandidos or the godless Comancheros, and that was the only reason they had allowed the Americans to settle this country. It sure as hell wasn't because the Mexicans had any fondness for Anglos. But no sooner had the sharpshooting, hard-fighting Americans tamed the land than the Mexican government wanted it back again. Well, the hell with that. Big Jim had sworn to fight and die if necessary to protect the range he had claimed and later bought with silver from a now-deposed dictator who had issued him a land grant on parchment as proof of ownership. He named his grant Rancho Los Amigos, though he had precious few friends in those hard first years. And now, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna was in power and demanding that the Americans hand over their weapons, become Catholics, and renounce their mother country. Big Jim and a lot of other Texans were prepared to fight to the death. It wasn't that Jim Killion disliked or mistrusted Mexicans either. Hell no, he would take a vaquero any day over a cowboy, and some of his best friends were the Mexican ranchers along both sides of the Rio Grande. He had married the daughter of one of them, hadn't he?